There's a specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't have a name yet for most people. It's not burnout because you're still delivering. It's not stress because you've managed stress before. It's a feeling of waking up already running. At the end of the day, unable to separate what was yours from what just landed. Of being the person everyone calls, not because your job requires it, but because somewhere along the way, the system decided you were the place where unclaimed things go. That's not a character flaw. That's a routing problem. And today's guest has lived it from the inside. Welcome to UnCeiling You, the podcast for high-performing women in corporate environments who are starting to suspect that the ceiling isn't above them. It's the invisible weight of everything they were never supposed to be carrying in the first place. I'm Dr. Natalie Luke, founder of UnCeiling You, and my work starts before burnout. Most conversations start after. Here's how to recover. Here's how to build resilience. Here's how to set better boundaries. This show starts earlier, at the part where you're still performing and something is quietly wrong and you don't have a word for it yet. Today, I'm joined by Rachael Edmondson-Clarke, leadership coach, founder of her own high-performance practice, and a woman who knows what it looks like when the most capable person in the room becomes the system itself. Rachael has coached executives and CEOs through the kind of inflection points that don't show up on performance reviews. She knows the biology of sustainable leadership, not the mindset version, the neuroscience version. And she has a story that opens this episode that I think is going to stop some of you in your tracks. Here's what you're going to take away from this conversation: why the very traits that make you successful are the same traits that made you the target for invisible responsibility. What it actually means to perform sustainably, not the wellness concept, but as an organizational one. And what the signals look like when your body has already started the conversation your organization hasn't had yet. This is not an episode about recovering from burnout. It's an episode catching what's happening before the receipt arrives. Let's get into it. Thank you so much for being on to Rachael, the UnCeiling You podcast. So I think we're going to have some really great straight talk here. And you've talked about collapsing on your office floor from burnout. Take me back to that day, not what it meant in hindsight, but what it actually felt like at the moment.
I can remember it vividly. It was in my glass-fronted office. I was preparing to go into the boardroom, and instead of walking out the door, I found myself lying on the floor, staring up at the ceiling tiles. I'd collapsed. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. And it was an incredibly frightening moment because I just didn't know what was happening to me.
I am so curious what brought you to that moment.
Well, it's easy in hindsight, but what had brought me to that moment had been not months, but longer than that. I'd go as far as to say years of disrespecting my body, of neglecting the most important relationship in my life, of feeling like the responsibility and the weight of the organization was mine to bear, and predominantly mine to bear, believing that the only way to make things better was just to keep pushing on and, to get to the, just to get through the next, whether it was the next project or the next launch or to the next weekend, kept stacking up and stacking up and stacking up until my body just went, "You're not listening, time out."
What Rachael just described has a name, and it's not burnout, not yet. In the trust tax framework, what she's describing is a responsibility funnel. It's not randomly distributed. It follows trust, experience, the ability to make sense of ambiguity, proximity to the people in charge. When uncertainty appears inside the organization, responsibility rarely follows the organizational chart. It follows whoever the system has learned will catch it. Rachael didn't choose to carry the weight of her organization. Her organization didn't hold a meeting and decide to load her. What happened is simpler and harder to argue against. She was capable, she was trusted, and so the unclaimed things kept finding her. That's not a compliment. That's a structural pattern with a cost. The Trust Tax Research Framework calls this responsibility routing, the invisible mechanism by which work, decisions, coordination, and accountability naturally converge on the same people who would never describe themselves as overwhelmed because they're still delivering. If you're listening to this and you're still delivering, that's exactly who this is for. Wow. I can totally relate to that. So before that moment, and with everything just stacking up and stacking up and stacking up, ignoring your body and your most important relationships, who did you feel you were as a leader? And what were you proud of at that moment before ending up on the floor?
I had been following what I thought I had always wanted. So from coming out of school and college, city, climbing that corporate ladder as I had done, I was incredibly proud of the role I had, the team I had, the impact that we had within the organization. And honestly, some of those trappings as well of success, whether that be that glass fronted office or the company car or, all of those things as well. I was incredibly proud of those. I'd always have fresh flowers in my office and, I made it a very nice environment for people to come and have meetings in. And as I say, in terms of, I was a leader that cared deeply, felt a great deal of responsibility, and was also quietly struggling. And I'd become disconnected with myself. I was constantly reframing the stress that I felt to enable me to, and that is why ultimately my body at the end of the day just went, this isn't, you're not paying attention. I'm gonna stop you. I'm gonna stop you in your tracks. But I cared deeply about the organization, about the people, about the work that we were doing. And I also wasn't able to show up truly as at my best because of the disconnection that I had.
Pause here for a moment, because what Rachael just said is one of the most important things in this episode, and it went by quietly. She wasn't burned out. She was reframing. In the trust tax cascade, there are 4 stages. Absorption, where you're taking on more and more, still feeling very capable. Vigilance, that's when something feels off, but you're compensating. You're scanning for what could go wrong before anyone asks. You're waking up running. You're reframing the weight so you can keep moving. Disconnection, and then exit or erosion. Most organizations lose people at stage 2, vigilance, while the dashboard still looks green. The person is performing, the team is delivering, nothing is on fire. But internally, it has started an ownership audit that never turns off. Rachael's body stopped that reframe before her mind could. Not everybody gets that moment. The question the trust tax asks is, what if you could see stage 2 before your body has to force the conversation? That's exactly what the trust tax diagnostic is built for. And I'll tell you more about that at the end of the episode. Wow. I am hoping that people hear that. It is a message I hear from many people that go through this, that they are disconnected. And most people who burn out just try to recover and move on. Just recover, like you said, get through the next launch, get to the next weekend. What made you stop even after the collapse? You could have kept going. What made you stop and ask a different question?
Honestly, I would describe that moment as if like life was hitting me round the face with a great big wet fish. I don't know why a great big wet fish, but it's kind of like this, come on, girl. Wake up was almost like the message, and it was so frightening and so debilitating in that moment. That changed the question. And when I did eventually get up off the floor and I did eventually manage to start breathing again, the conversation in my head was, this can't go on. This has to change. I have to do something. And that led me to speak to my director. And over time, what we did was we reorganized the team. We set a new structure with the team, and we also got new resource into the team. And ultimately, it meant that I took a step down. And I went back into the team. So the team that I had been leading, I actually took, and that glass fronted office I mentioned, I was so proud of. I went back out into the open plan office. And with those changes came a deal of guilt and shame as well, kind of, which was interesting. I can remember apologizing to our chief executive, feeling like I was a failure. And he was really kind, because I can remember him looking at me and sort of going almost a little bit confused, as if he was sort of saying, well, it wasn't you, Rachel. We let you down. The system let you down. The process let you, like, it wasn't, this has not all been entirely in your control. And that was deeply comforting. Not that anyone else knew I'd had that conversation, in terms of everyone else around the organization, they could very much see. And, and I watched, first of all, a consultant go into that glass fronted office, and then somebody from within the organization recruited to go into that office and then become my line manager. So that was all very, very interesting to deal with at the time.
Yeah, I can imagine how that could be. I've had similar situations where somebody else, ended up taking my leadership spot, and then I was a supportive. In one situation, that person's like, God, I feel like you're doing my job. I'm like, no, I'm not doing your job. I am supporting you so you can do your job better. And that kind of helped me because I knew the pressure that came with that job. One of the things that you have talked about is the phrase of sustainable high performance. And that could mean so many things. What does that actually mean? And more importantly, what does it not mean?
Sustainable high performance is that ability to be able to consistently show up at our best, and to be, and at its root, that's about being connected to ourselves in terms of what we've been talking about. Our feelings are really, really useful signals. And when we can better recognize if, we feel off kilter or not in a great place, and we can better understand how much of this is due to perhaps my biology or the physical environment, like, have I eaten, have I slept, have I, the stuff that our grandmas would tell us, how much of how I'm feeling is related to that, very practical, and how much of it is related to external people or things that might be causing an emotional dysregulation for me, and how much within that am I able to control, and how much within that can I look to resolve so that I'm not regulating myself all the time. Because what I had done was I had spent, as I said, years regulating how I was feeling whilst neglecting those practical things that my grandma would have told me, make sure you're taking care of, to the point that for me, it led to burnout. For others, that might look like challenges in, kind of cognitive or metabolic function. It might look like quiet disengagement from what we're doing. It might look like an increase in our, the way we perceive others, perhaps. more on threat alert. So it can show up in a number of different ways. It might look like departure for somebody else from an
Okay.
organization, but being tuned into what, I'm feeling something here. And that's a really useful signal. What is that telling me, and what action do I take so that I can continually show up at my best for myself, for whether that's family, our organizations, our wider communities, and the world at large. I think there's a huge cry for leaders who can do good in the world today, and leaders who are able to keep their heads high and their hearts open in spite of all of the rapid changes and uncertainty in terms of the context that many of us are operating in. So sustainably being able to show up at our best and stay connected to ourselves and our values so that we have that clarity is what that means to me.
Yeah. I really appreciate that. So many times, especially in the role that I have as an executive leader, one of the things that is really important to me is understanding what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling about a situation, so that when it feels off, I can address it directly. And I do my very best to address it directly with, if I have a situation that's wrong, with the person that can control the situation, or if I have a problem with a person and how maybe they're handling something, to address it directly with them privately in a respectful adult manner so we can solve the problem. And what I have found is that in doing so, other people will confide in me that they're worried about this or worried about that. I end up being a confidant and someone who tries to encourage them to address things.
And I think it's important to say that when we're addressing things like that it's not always a quick fix.
Yeah.
And I think it's also really useful to, again, be better understanding ourselves so that we can choose the right moment and enable others that freedom of choice as well to choose the right moment.
Yes.
To maybe have some of those discussions. And, I had one example. I was working with a recently appointed CEO, and he had a very difficult relationship with the chair of the board, and it was quite disruptive. And it took almost a year for that to be fully resolved. And that chairman did eventually exit from the board. But that took, that wasn't a quick fix. And how we support one another during that time and how we keep focused on what we can control. And I think if we feel as though we are making at least some progress towards these things, that's really helpful as well. But it was really, just to share for anyone listening, is that recognition that, yes, of course, some things can be resolved very quickly, but others can take time. And some things we may never be able to resolve. And in which case, finding useful ways to reframe that and be able to, live with that is another helpful strategy.
Thank you so much for bringing that out. I think it's such an important point to know that some things just take some time, and some things will never get resolved. Now, you said the very things that make a leader valuable makes them vulnerable. And that kind of sounds cruel. Can you explain it a little? Before Rachael answers this, I want to give you a framework underneath it. The Trust Tax research identifies what it calls routable signals, the specific characteristics that influence the likelihood that invisible responsibility naturally moves towards you. Being outspoken, so the system knows you'll move when the room gets quiet. Managing ambiguity effectively, so the system routes the unresolved things your way because you'll make sense of them. Being close to power, understanding how leadership thinks, so you're the one who picks up the gap without needing a briefing. These are organizational assets, every one of them. Your organization selected for them. Your career advanced because of them. And here is the uncomfortable part. The same characteristics that make you valuable are the reasons the unclaimed work keeps finding you. Not because you're weak, not because you lack boundaries, because the system learned correctly that you'll catch it. This is the trust tax, not paid in hours, paid in the bandwidth that was supposed to go somewhere else.
So a lot of the leaders that I work with, as you can imagine, they're high achievers. They're high achieving people. They have been incredibly successful in their lives. They wouldn't have got to where they've got to if they weren't. And I also think that that can have some traits that can be challenging. Often, high achievers, they have very high standards for themselves. They are really good at reframing stress and being able to kind of push on through. They can also get quite addicted to the dopamine hit. So when they hit the project, or they've done the conference, or, they've got the tender and, they've won that thing. And so that can become quite addictive, and then that can drive behaviors that can then lead to the kind of the constant pushing of oneself, not listening or being connected, and ultimately trouble then later on down the line. And the other thing I'll just very quickly add to that is that often high performers, they'll associate themselves with a lot of other high performers. So they're in this environment where, well, hang on a minute, I've got peers and other people that are doing really well around me. So that kind of encourages even more of that. So, that's a pattern that I see and that I notice with a lot of high achievers that I work with.
So now you're talking about the dopamine, and most people think leadership is just about mindset. You bring in neuroscience and biology. What does that change about the conversation when you're talking with folks?
Gosh. Well, it impacts in such a deep and fundamental level. So I do a lot of work with Professor Chris Beede, and he is the founder of an organization called CHX Performance. He's a professor of evolutionary anthropology, cognition and neuroscience here in the UK at Oxford and Kent University. And I just absolutely love his work, because it comes back to everything. If I bring this back full circle to the original story and being on my, office floor, comes back to, I was ignoring the biology. I was ignoring all of that, and do so at your peril. We, I think, very often pay more attention to making sure that our phones and devices are well charged up than we do that we're charged up. And we talk about the biology of leadership. Well, how are we going to show up with clarity, with creativity, with empathy, with a bandwidth to deal with stress and strains and challenges, and the capacity to deal with those things? If we aren't eating regularly, hydrating, getting daylight, getting nature, getting movement, spending time with people who, that connection with others that can fill us up as well. And add this lovely story from, I was working with an executive team recently, and they recognized that one of the things that they collectively did really poorly was movement. And so they paired them up so that they were working in buddy pairs. And the idea was that when they were in the office, they were going to get out and walk and get some fresh air. And there was a couple that were buddying together, and one phoned the other one and just went, "How are you getting on? I don't think I've got time to go for that walk today." They'd scheduled like 20 minutes to go like out of the office and round. And the other one went, "Yeah, no, I don't think I've got that time today either." "Okay, but we know how important this is. So look, shall we just do 5 minutes?" So they got their coats on, they left the office. Incidentally, someone else from the execs team saw them going and felt jealous, because they were like, "How have they got time to go out for that walk today?" They got out, and once they were out for that 20 minutes that they had fully scheduled, because as they were walking, they were realizing that they were getting greater clarity on their problems, that they were solving them with more creativity. and that they were genuinely, it was impacting their capacity to be able to perform better in their roles and as leaders by taking that time. But it so often feels counterintuitive to us as leaders to take that pause, because we're like, but I've got to get this thing done, and I got to go to the next thing, and I got to go to the next thing.
That detailed jealousy is not a sidebar. That is stage 2. Vigilance showing up inside a team in real time. The person watching from inside the building didn't feel inspired that their colleagues were recovering. They felt something closer to a threat because somewhere in the system, rest had been coded as illegitimate, as something other people get to do, as evidence that someone, somewhere, isn't carrying what they're supposed to be carrying. That's what the trust tax research called sustained vigilance, a form of cognitive load where the nervous system stays on alert even when there's no immediate crisis. This is not anxiety. This is misplaced responsibility. It's the weight of unresolved ownership showing up as a physical state, a scan that never fully powers down. The trust tax framework is clear. This is not a personal regulation problem. It's a structural signal. When the organization's most capable people feel guilty for a 20-minute walk, the system has normalized absorption as the standard. And that standard is quietly consuming the capacity the organization needs to execute, to innovate, and to keep those very people.
So you were talking about the biology of it, and, I trust that story is a little reminder of just how important that biology is to how we then show up, our energy, our mood, and our bandwidth to be able to deal with the stresses, the strains, and the challenges that leadership brings every day.
So a call out to the listener. So if you feel like you're overwhelmed with something and that you must stick to your desk, just get up and take a walk. The answer will come to you.
Yeah. And that's hard in the moment. I recognize that's hard because the instinct is I got to keep going. I just don't have the time to do that. But even if it's literally 5 minutes round the block or to the end of the road or whatever it is. And I would encourage people to be a scientist of themselves with those things. Recognize the resistance to go and do it. Often resistance points the way. So go and experiment and see what, don't take my word for it. Go and experiment and see, does that help? Does it make a change? Is it better or not? And just be that scientist of yourself, particularly when it comes to that biology.
Excellent. So now if a leader is listening right now and they recognize themselves in the resistance, I don't have time for that. And what you're describing, what is the one thing that they can that they're probably doing this week that makes it worse?
Ignoring the signal. I'm going to come right back to that connection again. Ask yourself instead, what is this? Where's it coming from? Is this because I'm struggling, or I haven't had enough sleep, or actually I've not eaten properly today, or I haven't been out and moved myself, haven't had daylight, haven't let the sun, come into my eyes and just enjoy that for a few. Is it that, or is it because something or someone has triggered me? And I've got something that I need to resolve. And is it a combination of both? Because, of course, those two things do interplay. But one we have potentially more control over. I know that sometimes it's not easy to control our sleep, and that can be difficult. But one potentially we do have more control over than the other. And so really making sure that we are in our own personal ecosystems, as popped up as we can be, is going to be a really good place to start. And really tuning into what are those signals telling you, what are those feelings, they're signals. So what are they telling you? And therefore, what is it then best to do about it?
Okay, so that person's listening and they're starting to say, okay, let's listen to those signals. What changes happen visibly day to day as a result?
When you listen to those signals, you then have greater capacity to be able to deal with whatever is coming your way. So the challenges, the pressures, the strains, you have increased bandwidth, and you are enabling yourself to show up at your best in doing that.
And that is why we're here. To help you be your best, to embrace that light within. What do you want a leader who just recognized themselves in this conversation to know, not do, just know before they close this episode?
To know that you're not alone, to know that we are more alike than perhaps some of us think we are. And I would want them to know that the answers are within. Closing thoughts for me are really just around that if we're going to show up in the world as the leaders that our world needs right now, and whether that means you're leading your family or your organization or your community, the very best thing that we can do, and ultimately the only thing that we can control, is how we show up ourselves. And that starts with that love and care for ourselves and being connected and tuned in to what your body, your heart, your mind is telling you. They are important signals. Please listen to them. And if you're not sure how to read those signals, then reach out.
There you go, because there isn't a check engine light, and having some help in reading those signals is important.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rachael, so much for joining us. I think the information you're bringing is so important, and I'm so grateful that you took that one event and turned it into a catalyst for so many to learn from.
It's where so much of the beauty lies, and the silver linings and the hindsight. And I trust if that little part of my journey can shed some light and help for others. I just appreciate the space that you bring and enable us to be able to share these stories. So Natalie, thank you so much.
Thank you. Rachael said something near the end of this conversation that I want to stay with for just a moment. She said, the answers are within. I believe that. And I also want to offer you one more thing, because knowing the answers are within doesn't help if your brain won't quiet down long enough to hear them. If any part of this episode landed, if you recognize yourself in the reframing, in the weight that felt like yours to carry, in the body that started the conversation before your mind was ready, there's a specific reason some nights you cannot turn off. It's not anxiety. It's an ownership audit. Your brain is scanning for what is unresolved, what shifted, and what's still technically in your court, even though you left the building hours ago. That's not a sleep problem. That's a containment problem. I built a tool for exactly this moment. It's called Reset Tonight, a 7-minute leadership grade downshift so you could sleep tonight. It doesn't ask you to pretend the work is finished. It helps your system put responsibility back where it belongs so you can sleep tonight without carrying what was never yours to carry past midnight. It's free, and it's waiting for you at the UnCeiling Zone. UnCeiling zone.com/get-to-sleep. The link is in the show notes. If tonight's fine, but what's not fine is that you can't quite name the weight you're carrying, the Trust Tax Diagnostic will do that in 5 minutes. Free, immediate, no catch. It gives you a load score, your cascade stage, and a language to introduce the structural questions in your organization. That link is also in the show notes. Thank you for being here. Thank you to Rachael for bringing all of herself to this conversation. The floor, the guilt, the CEO who finally said, it wasn't you. That moment matters, you matter, and the work of seeing clearly, that's where everything changes. I'll see you next time.